when your mind won't rest. 7. Stoic habits to find inner peace immediately. Your mind is tired, and maybe nobody around you can see it. You wake up already thinking. Before your feet even touch the floor, your mind is already running through unfinished conversations, future problems, responsibilities, fears, expectations, regrets. The day has not even started, yet mentally, you already feel behind. You try to relax for a moment, but your thoughts refuse to slow down. You sit in silence, but inside your head there is noise, constant noise, endless noise. And the worst part is that most people around you have no idea this is happening. They see you functioning. They see you working, responding, smiling, surviving. But they do not see the invisible war taking place inside your mind every single day. They do not see how exhausting it is to constantly replay situations that already ended. They do not see the emotional weight of imagining disasters that have not even happened. They do not see the pressure of trying to mentally prepare for every possible outcome, because somewhere deep inside, your brain convinced you that constant thinking will somehow protect you from pain. But it never does. The mind has a dangerous habit of pretending that worry is wisdom. It makes you believe that if you think long enough, analyze deeply enough, and predict enough possibilities, you will finally feel safe. Yet the exact opposite happens. The more you feed mental chaos, the more restless your inner world becomes. Peace slowly disappears, not because life became impossible, but because your mind never stops creating tension. This is why so many people are emotionally exhausted without understanding why. They believe they are tired because of work, responsibilities, relationships, or pressure. But often the real exhaustion comes from carrying thousands of unnecessary thoughts every single day. The body can recover from physical effort. The mind struggles to recover from constant emotional noise. The ancient Stoics understood this long before modern psychology existed. Men like Marcus Aurelius knew that a person who cannot govern their own thoughts will eventually become a prisoner of them. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 4, Paragraph 3, he reminded himself that the quality of a person's life depends heavily on the quality of their thoughts. Not because thoughts magically control reality, but because thoughts shape perception, emotion, reaction, and inner peace. That is exactly what most people fail to realize. Your mind does not simply observe reality. It interprets it, it exaggerates it, it distorts it. Sometimes it even attacks you with imaginary versions of the future that never happen. Yet your nervous system reacts as if the danger were real. Your heart beats faster, your chest tightens, your peace disappears, your energy drains away. All because your mind created a threat that only exists inside your imagination. And after years of living this way, overthinking starts to feel normal. Silence feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels unnatural. Calmness feels unfamiliar. Your brain becomes so conditioned to stress that peace almost feels suspicious. Some people cannot even rest without feeling guilty. Others cannot enjoy the present moment because their mind is constantly trying to escape into the future, searching for the next possible problem. This is why mental exhaustion has become one of the silent epidemics of modern life. People are physically present but mentally absent. They are alive, but internally disconnected. Their mind never stops moving long enough to experience clarity. And the frightening truth is that many of these destructive mental habits are so subtle that most people never realize they are being controlled by them. The Stoics trained themselves differently. They understood that inner peace is not found by controlling the outside world. It is found by learning how to stop feeding unnecessary chaos inside your own mind. They knew that suffering grows when thoughts are left unexamined. They knew that fear becomes stronger when imagination is allowed to run freely. Most importantly, they understood that a restless mind will eventually destroy its own peace even in peaceful environments. Right now, there is a high chance your mind is carrying emotional weight it no longer needs to carry. Old fears, imaginary scenarios, endless internal conversations, invisible pressure, mental habits that quietly consume your energy every single day without you noticing. And one of the most dangerous habits of all is so common that millions of people mistake it for intelligence. They call it preparation, they call it responsibility, they call it being careful. But in reality, It is often an addiction to overthinking that slowly steals their ability to feel peace. And once you understand how this habit truly controls the mind, you will never see your thoughts the same way again. The silent addiction to overthinking. Most people do not realize they are addicted to overthinking because modern society quietly rewards mental exhaustion. The person who constantly worries is often seen as responsible. The person who endlessly analyzes situations appears intelligent. The person who never mentally switches off is praised as productive, disciplined, and prepared. But beneath that appearance of control, something dangerous is happening. The mind slowly becomes trapped in a cycle of permanent tension without even noticing it. Overthinking does not arrive violently, it grows silently. At first it feels useful. Your mind convinces you that constantly thinking about every possible outcome will protect you from pain. It tells you that worrying means you are preparing yourself. It tells you that replaying situations repeatedly will somehow help you avoid future mistakes. But what begins as caution slowly transforms into emotional imprisonment. You start analyzing conversations that already ended hours ago. You begin imagining future scenarios that do not exist. Small uncertainties become massive internal conflicts. Your brain keeps searching for hidden threats, hidden rejection, hidden failure. Even during peaceful moments, your mind refuses to rest because it has become addicted to emotional anticipation. This is why so many people are mentally exhausted before the day even begins. Their body may be sitting still, but internally their mind is running nonstop. Thinking, predicting, preparing, imagining, replaying, questioning, doubting. It becomes a constant internal noise that never fully disappears. Over time, this habit quietly steals the ability to experience peace in the present moment. The terrifying part is that overthinking creates the illusion of control while actually destroying emotional stability. The mind falsely believes that constant mental activity equals safety. But the truth is that excessive thinking rarely solves problems. Most of the time, it simply magnifies fear. Epictetus understood this deeply. In Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, Chapter 1, he explained that human beings suffer more from their interpretations than from reality itself. That teaching becomes painfully clear when you observe how often the mind creates emotional suffering from situations that never happen. Think about how many nights people lose sleep over imagined conversations. Think about how many moments of peace disappear because the mind starts predicting future disaster. Think about how many relationships become emotionally exhausting because someone cannot stop mentally creating problems before they even exist. The mind becomes a machine designed to search for danger. And eventually, overthinking no longer feels optional. It becomes automatic. Some people can no longer sit quietly without immediately reaching for distraction. Others feel anxious the moment silence appears because silence forces them to confront the chaos inside their own head. The brain becomes so conditioned to mental stimulation that peace itself starts to feel uncomfortable. This is one of the reasons modern minds are so restless. People consume endless information every day, yet rarely spend time observing the quality of their own thoughts. They fill every moment with noise because deep down, they are afraid of what silence might reveal. But the Stoics believed silence exposed truth. They understood that a person who never examines their own mind will eventually become controlled by it. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself that the mind takes the shape of what it repeatedly focuses on. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 5, paragraph 16, he reflected on the importance of protecting the mind from unnecessary disturbance. He knew that external events were not the greatest threat to inner peace. Uncontrolled thoughts were. That idea becomes extremely important once you realize how much emotional pain is created internally. A person can ruin an entire day simply by mentally replaying one negative interaction over and over again. Someone can destroy their own confidence by imagining rejection before even taking action. Others spend years trapped in anxiety because their mind constantly predicts catastrophic outcomes that never arrive. The body reacts to imagined danger almost the same way it reacts to real danger. Your heart accelerates, your breathing changes, your muscles tense, your nervous system enters survival mode. All because the mind created a scenario that does not exist outside your imagination. This is why overthinking becomes so emotionally exhausting. Your body keeps paying the price for wars that reality never declared, and the longer this continues, the more difficult it becomes to recognize what true mental calmness feels like. Some people have lived in internal chaos for so long that peace feels unfamiliar to them. Their thoughts never stop long enough for clarity to emerge. Their mind constantly pulls them away from the present moment into fear, regret, uncertainty, or anticipation. The Stoics trained themselves to interrupt this pattern. They understood that not every thought deserves attention. Not every fear deserves belief. Not every emotion deserves immediate reaction. Wisdom was not found in thinking more. Wisdom was found in learning which thoughts should be ignored completely. That is where inner peace begins. The moment you stop treating every thought like truth. The moment you realize your mind can create suffering even when reality is calm. The moment you understand that mental noise is not intelligence. It is often fear wearing the mask of preparation. And once a person becomes aware of this silent addiction, they begin noticing something even more disturbing. The mind does not only overthink real situations, sometimes it creates entire emotional struggles out of problems that do not even exist yet. Why your mind creates problems that don't exist. One of the strangest things about the human mind is that it can suffer intensely over events that never actually happen. A person can sit alone in a quiet room while their mind creates rejection, humiliation, failure, abandonment, catastrophe, conflict, and fear out of absolutely nothing. The body reacts emotionally as if the danger were real, even when reality itself remains completely calm. This is how the mind slowly becomes its own source of suffering. Most people believe they are reacting to life itself, but often they are reacting to mental predictions about life. The brain constantly scans for possible threats because survival has always depended on anticipating danger. Thousands of years ago, this instinct helped human beings survive harsh environments. But in modern life, the same mechanism frequently turns against us. Now the mind predicts emotional threats instead of physical ones. It imagines people secretly judging you. It imagines failure before you even begin. It imagines betrayal before trust is broken. It imagines future disasters before reality gives any sign they will happen. And the frightening part is that the mind usually presents these imaginary scenarios as certainty. That is why anxiety feels so convincing. Your thoughts do not arrive saying, "This could happen." They arrive saying, "This will happen." Over time, the brain becomes so skilled at creating negative possibilities that a person begins living emotionally inside imagined futures instead of present reality. This is why so many people struggle to feel peace even when nothing is technically wrong. Externally, life may be stable. Internally, the mind is manufacturing chaos. A single unanswered message becomes rejection. A small mistake becomes future failure. One difficult moment becomes proof that everything is falling apart. The mind continuously expands small uncertainties into emotional catastrophes. Seneca warned about this directly in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 13, when he explained that human beings suffer far more in imagination than in reality. That sentence exposes one of the deepest psychological truths about anxiety. Most suffering does not come from the present moment itself. It comes from mental projections about what could happen next. Think about how often your fears never become reality. How many times has your mind predicted disaster only for everything to turn out completely fine? How many nights have people lost sleep over conversations that never happened? How many opportunities have been abandoned because the mind imagined failure before action even began? How many relationships were damaged because fear invented problems that were never real? The mind has an incredible ability to transform uncertainty into emotional pain. That is why mentally exhausted people often feel tired even after doing nothing physical. Their energy is consumed by fighting invisible battles inside their imagination. The brain keeps preparing for threats that never arrive, and the nervous system remains trapped in constant alert mode. Over time, this creates emotional hypervigilance. The person becomes mentally unable to relax because their mind interprets uncertainty as danger. Silence becomes uncomfortable because silence gives thoughts more space to grow. Stillness becomes threatening because the brain immediately fills the emptiness with imagined scenarios. This is one of the hidden reasons modern minds feel so overwhelmed. People are no longer only living reality. They are living inside nonstop mental simulations created by fear. The Stoics understood that the mind must be disciplined, or it will create unnecessary suffering endlessly. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself to separate facts from interpretation. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, paragraph 47, he reflected on how external events are often neutral until the mind assigns destructive meaning to them. That lesson changes everything once you truly understand it. Most emotional pain is amplified by interpretation. A delayed response is not automatically rejection. A mistake is not automatically failure. Uncertainty is not automatically danger. But the untrained mind treats possibilities as reality. It reacts emotionally to assumptions before evidence even exists. This creates a cycle where fear constantly feeds itself. The more the mind imagines threats, the more sensitive it becomes to future uncertainty. Eventually, a person starts living defensively against imaginary futures. They hesitate to take risks. They avoid difficult conversations. They suppress emotions. They over-prepare for situations that may never happen. They mentally exhaust themselves trying to control outcomes that do not exist yet. And beneath all of this is one silent belief driving the entire cycle. If I predict the pain early enough, maybe I can avoid it. But life does not work that way. The attempt to mentally control the future often destroys the ability to experience the present. Instead of protecting peace, the mind slowly suffocates it with anticipation. The Stoics practiced something radically different. They trained themselves to return to reality instead of feeding imagination. They understood that the present moment is almost always more manageable than the fearful scenarios created by the mind. That is why they focused on what was real, observable, and within their control instead of becoming emotionally trapped inside endless mental predictions. Because once the mind learns to create problems that do not exist, it becomes capable of turning ordinary life into constant psychological tension. And if this habit continues long enough, something even more dangerous begins to happen. The mind no longer creates suffering only from the future. It starts chaining itself emotionally to the past as well. The dangerous habit of mentally replaying everything. Some people leave a conversation physically, but mentally they never leave it at all. Hours later, their mind is still replaying every word, every reaction, every facial expression, every possible interpretation. They imagine better responses they could have said. They analyze whether they sounded weak, awkward, annoying, emotional, foolish, or misunderstood. One small interaction becomes an endless mental courtroom where the mind constantly puts itself on trial. This is one of the most destructive habits a restless mind develops. The constant repetition of past moments. The brain convinces you that replaying situations will somehow help you gain clarity, avoid future mistakes, or regain emotional control. But most of the time, the exact opposite happens. The more you replay the past, the more emotionally trapped inside it you become. That is why some people cannot move forward emotionally even when life itself has already moved on. Their body exists in the present, but their mind remains attached to old conversations, old failures, old embarrassment, old regret, old pain. They keep reopening emotional wounds internally until the brain no longer knows the difference between memory and current reality. This is how mental replay slowly steals peace. A single uncomfortable moment can follow someone for years because the mind refuses to release it. One mistake becomes part of their identity. One rejection becomes proof they are not enough. One painful memory becomes emotional evidence used against themselves over and over again. And the frightening part is that most people do this automatically. The mind develops a compulsive need to revisit emotional discomfort as if suffering longer will somehow create resolution. But repeated mental replay rarely produces wisdom. Most of the time, it only deepens emotional exhaustion. Seneca understood how dangerous this habit was. In Letters from a Stoic, letter 27, he warned about becoming mentally enslaved to emotional disturbance. He believed that a person who constantly revisits emotional pain strengthens its influence over the mind instead of weakening it. Modern psychology now confirms something remarkably similar. The more frequently a person mentally rehearses painful experiences, the stronger those emotional pathways become inside the brain. Repetition creates reinforcement. The mind literally trains itself to remain emotionally attached to distress. That is why people who constantly replay painful memories often feel emotionally drained, even when nothing painful is currently happening. Their suffering is being recreated internally. And sometimes the mind does this because it desperately wants certainty. It wants to fully understand why something happened, why someone acted a certain way, why a relationship changed, why rejection occurred, why failure happened. But life rarely gives complete emotional closure. Many situations remain imperfect, unresolved, unclear, or unfinished. The mind struggles to accept that uncertainty, so it keeps replaying the past, searching for answers that may never arrive. This creates invisible emotional imprisonment. The person appears calm externally while internally reliving the same emotional cycles every single day. Some people replay arguments while showering. Others relive embarrassment before falling asleep. Some mentally revisit painful memories the moment they wake up. Eventually, their brain becomes conditioned to return to emotional pain automatically. The Stoics trained themselves to interrupt this cycle before it consumed them. Epictetus taught that human beings must learn to distinguish between what deserves attention and what deserves release. In Discourses of Epictetus, Book 3, Chapter 8, he explained that the mind becomes disturbed when it clings too tightly to emotional impressions instead of observing them rationally. That lesson becomes life-changing once you understand it deeply. Not every memory deserves permanent residence inside your mind. Not every mistake deserves lifelong punishment. Not every uncomfortable moment deserves endless analysis. The restless mind believes that constantly revisiting the past creates control. But in reality, it creates emotional stagnation. You cannot experience peace while mentally living in moments that no longer exist. And the dangerous thing about mental replay is that it slowly reshapes identity. A person who constantly replays rejection starts seeing themselves as rejected. A person who constantly replays failure starts believing they are incapable. A person who constantly revisits embarrassment begins fearing judgment everywhere they go. The mind eventually starts building personality around repeated emotional memories. That is why mentally replaying everything becomes so psychologically exhausting. You are not only remembering pain, you are repeatedly reliving it. Meanwhile, life continues moving forward. Opportunities appear, new moments arrive, peace becomes available, but the mind remains emotionally occupied by ghosts of situations that already ended. This is why the Stoics valued presence so deeply. They understood that inner peace requires the ability to release what no longer exists. Not because the past did not matter, but because endlessly reliving it destroys the ability to experience the present clearly. And many people do not realize something even more disturbing begins happening after years of mental replay. The noise inside the mind becomes so constant that eventually they stop noticing how mentally exhausted they truly are. The inner noise. Nobody around you can hear. There are people who look completely calm on the outside while internally their mind never stops screaming. They continue working, they continue talking, they continue showing up every day. But inside there is constant pressure, constant thinking, constant emotional movement. Their thoughts race from one fear to another, from one memory to another, from one imagined problem to another without ever fully resting. This is the kind of exhaustion almost nobody notices. Physical exhaustion is visible. Emotional exhaustion is silent. That is why so many mentally overwhelmed people learn how to hide their suffering so well. They smile while internally collapsing. They laugh while carrying invisible tension inside their chest. They tell everyone they are fine because explaining the chaos inside their mind feels impossible. How do you explain a mind that never becomes quiet? How do you explain being tired without physically doing anything? How do you explain that your greatest battle happens entirely inside your own head? The frightening truth is that many people become so accustomed to internal noise that they no longer recognize it as unhealthy. They wake up stressed, spend the day mentally overstimulated, and go to sleep emotionally drained. Eventually, chaos starts feeling normal. The mind keeps producing thoughts nonstop, and the nervous system never fully relaxes. This is why some people feel uncomfortable during silence. The moment external noise disappears, internal noise becomes impossible to ignore. Suddenly, the mind starts replaying regrets, predicting problems, revisiting fears, imagining conversations, creating tension. Silence exposes the emotional clutter that distraction normally hides. That is why modern life is filled with endless stimulation. People scroll constantly, consume constantly, watch constantly, listen constantly. Not always because they enjoy it, but because distraction temporarily protects them from confronting their own thoughts. The Stoics understood this danger deeply. They believed that a person unable to sit calmly with their own mind would eventually become emotionally dependent on external distraction. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly emphasized the importance of inner stillness in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 6, paragraph 11, where he reminded himself that the mind gains strength when it learns to return inward peacefully instead of becoming controlled by external chaos. That idea feels almost impossible for many modern minds. People have become so psychologically overstimulated that true stillness feels unnatural. Their attention constantly jumps from one thought to another. Even while resting, the mind keeps searching for stimulation. Even during peaceful moments, the brain continues manufacturing emotional noise, and the body quietly absorbs the consequences. The nervous system remains tense, sleep becomes shallow, anxiety increases, patience weakens, emotional reactions intensify. The person becomes mentally exhausted without understanding why. This happens because the brain was never designed to remain in continuous psychological alert mode. Human beings need mental recovery, the same way muscles need physical recovery. But many people never allow their mind to recover because internal noise continues all day long. Some people carry entire arguments in their head for hours. Others mentally rehearse future disasters repeatedly. Some continuously criticize themselves internally without realizing how damaging it has become. The mind becomes a place of constant emotional pressure. Over time, this silent mental overload starts changing personality itself. A calm person becomes irritable. A hopeful person becomes cynical. A patient person becomes emotionally reactive. Not because life necessarily became worse, but because internal noise consumed their emotional energy slowly over time. Modern psychology often calls this cognitive overload. The Stoics described it differently, but they recognized the same danger centuries ago. They understood that an undisciplined mind becomes vulnerable to emotional instability because it cannot distinguish between what deserves attention and what should be ignored. Epictetus believed that external events only gain power when the mind continuously feeds them emotionally. That teaching becomes incredibly important once you realize how much suffering is amplified internally through repetitive attention. The mind strengthens whatever it repeatedly focuses on. Focus repeatedly on fear, and fear grows. Focus repeatedly on rejection, and insecurity grows. Focus repeatedly on anger, and emotional tension grows. This is why internal noise becomes so dangerous. It quietly shapes emotional reality without most people noticing. And the longer this noise continues, the more disconnected people become from themselves. Many individuals no longer know what genuine calmness feels like. Their baseline emotional state becomes mental tension. Their thoughts move so fast that clarity disappears. They lose the ability to simply exist peacefully in the present moment because their mind constantly drags them somewhere else. The Stoics practiced something radically different. They trained themselves to observe thoughts without becoming consumed by them. They understood that peace is not created by eliminating every external problem. Peace begins when the mind stops turning every experience into internal chaos. That is why stillness was so valuable to them. Stillness reveals truth. Stillness exposes emotional dependency. Stillness uncovers mental habits hidden beneath distraction. And most importantly, stillness reveals how much suffering is being created inside the mind unnecessarily. because once a person becomes aware of their internal noise, they begin noticing another painful truth. Much of that mental exhaustion comes from constantly needing emotional approval from other people. Why peace disappears when you need constant validation. One of the fastest ways to lose inner peace is to place your emotional stability in the hands of other people. The moment your mind becomes dependent on approval, attention, recognition, or acceptance, peace becomes fragile. Your emotions begin rising and falling based on how others respond to you. A compliment lifts you temporarily. A cold reaction destroys your confidence. Silence feels like rejection. Criticism feels like personal failure. Eventually, your entire emotional state becomes controlled by external reactions you cannot fully control. This is how many people slowly abandon themselves without realizing it. They begin shaping their personality around being liked. They monitor how others perceive them. They overanalyze messages, reactions, facial expressions, tone of voice. They become emotionally exhausted trying to avoid disapproval, and beneath all of it is one painful fear: the fear of not being enough. The human mind deeply desires acceptance because social belonging once meant survival. Thousands of years ago, rejection from the tribe could mean death. Even today, the nervous system still reacts strongly to social exclusion, criticism, and emotional distance. That is why the need for validation can become psychologically addictive. Every small sign of approval creates temporary emotional relief. Every sign of rejection creates emotional instability. The mind starts chasing validation the same way a thirsty person chases water. But there is a dangerous problem with building your peace around external approval. Other people are unpredictable. Their opinions change constantly. Their moods change constantly. Their attention changes constantly. A person who bases emotional stability on external validation eventually lives in permanent psychological insecurity because the source of their peace exists outside their control. Epictetus warned about this directly in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 29, where he explained that anyone who depends emotionally on things outside their control becomes vulnerable to endless disturbance. That includes the opinions of other people. This becomes painfully obvious in modern life. People constantly compare themselves online. They measure their worth through attention. They seek emotional reassurance through approval. They become terrified of criticism, because criticism threatens the identity they built around external acceptance. Some people no longer know who they truly are beneath the performance they maintain for others. That performance becomes exhausting. Pretending to always be impressive, always agreeable, always emotionally available, always successful, always strong. The mind never fully rests because it constantly monitors how it is being perceived. This creates invisible emotional tension every day. A person walks into a room already worried about judgment, posts something online and immediately seeks validation, replays conversations wondering if they sounded intelligent enough, attractive enough, interesting enough. Their peace disappears because their attention remains trapped in the minds of other people instead of grounded within themselves. The Stoics considered this one of the greatest threats to inner freedom. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that the opinions of others should never govern his emotional state. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 12, Paragraph 4, he reflected on how quickly human praise disappears and how dangerous it becomes when a person emotionally depends on it. That lesson feels especially important today. Modern culture encourages people to build identity through external reaction. Approval becomes emotional currency. Attention becomes self-worth. Visibility becomes value. But the more emotionally dependent a person becomes on external validation, the more unstable their peace becomes internally. Because approval can never fully satisfy an insecure mind. Even when validation arrives, the relief is temporary. The mind immediately seeks more reassurance, more confirmation, more acceptance, more proof of worthiness. This creates a cycle where peace constantly depends on emotional feedback from the outside world, and eventually, people become disconnected from their own judgment entirely. They stop asking themselves what feels true. Instead, they ask what will be accepted. They stop expressing themselves honestly Instead, they perform versions of themselves designed to avoid rejection. This slowly destroys authenticity. The Stoics believed true emotional strength begins when a person no longer needs constant external reassurance to feel internally stable. That does not mean becoming cold, distant, or emotionally numb. It means developing enough inner clarity that your value no longer rises and falls based on temporary opinions. Because people will misunderstand you sometimes. They will criticize you sometimes. They will reject you sometimes. That is part of life. But when your peace depends entirely on being accepted by everyone, you become emotionally fragile. The mind stays in constant alert mode, trying to protect itself from judgment. Anxiety grows, overthinking grows, emotional exhaustion grows. And the frightening part is that many people spend years chasing approval without realizing they are slowly abandoning inner peace in the process. The Stoics practiced something radically different. They trained themselves to seek self-respect before social approval. They focused on character instead of appearance, internal discipline instead of external praise. They understood that peace becomes possible only when your emotional stability stops depending on uncontrollable reactions from other people. Because once a person becomes free from constant validation, they begin seeing another important truth. Most external chaos only gains power when the mind emotionally attaches itself to it. The Stoic art of emotionally detaching from chaos. Most people are not destroyed by chaos itself. They are destroyed by their emotional attachment to it. The problem is not only what happens around them. The problem is that every external situation immediately enters their mind, controls their emotions, dominates their thoughts, and steals their peace. A single criticism ruins the entire day. One unexpected problem creates panic. One difficult conversation keeps replaying mentally for hours. The outside world constantly invades the inner world because the mind never learned how to create emotional distance. This is why so many people feel mentally overwhelmed. Their emotions react instantly to everything. Every inconvenience becomes emotional tension. Every disagreement becomes internal stress. Every uncertainty becomes psychological pressure. The mind absorbs external chaos like a sponge absorbs water. And over time, this emotional reactivity becomes exhausting. The Stoics trained themselves differently. They understood that emotional detachment does not mean becoming cold, emotionless, or indifferent. It means developing the ability to observe situations without immediately surrendering your inner peace to them. It means learning how to remain internally stable even when external conditions become unstable. That kind of emotional discipline changes everything. Because once the mind stops reacting impulsively to every disturbance, clarity begins to appear. Most people never pause between event and reaction. Something happens and the mind instantly creates emotional meaning. Someone criticizes them, and they immediately feel attacked. Something goes wrong, and they immediately imagine disaster. Someone behaves coldly, and they immediately assume rejection. The emotional reaction becomes automatic. But the Stoics believed that freedom exists inside the space between what happens and how you respond to it. Epictetus taught this constantly. In Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, Chapter 18, he explained that external events do not control people directly. What controls them is the judgment they attach to those events. That single idea became one of the foundations of Stoic emotional mastery. Because the mind often creates suffering faster than reality creates harm. A person hears criticism and instantly creates shame, faces uncertainty and instantly creates fear, experiences difficulty and instantly creates hopelessness. The external event may be temporary, but the emotional interpretation keeps the suffering alive internally. This is why emotionally reactive minds struggle to find peace. They constantly allow the outside world to dictate their internal state. The Stoics understood that inner stability requires emotional separation from things outside your control. Not physical separation, psychological separation. The ability to recognize that external chaos does not automatically deserve internal chaos. That mindset becomes incredibly powerful during difficult moments. A calm mind sees more clearly. A reactive mind loses perspective. When emotions immediately take control, judgment weakens. Small situations begin feeling enormous. Temporary discomfort starts feeling permanent. The mind becomes emotionally consumed by circumstances instead of responding wisely to them. This is why emotionally detached people often appear stronger during crisis. Not because they feel nothing, but because they refuse to let panic dominate their judgment. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 7, paragraph 67, he reminded himself that external events cannot touch the mind unless the mind allows them entrance. That lesson was not about denial, it was about discipline. The disciplined mind chooses observation before reaction. That changes emotional life completely. Instead of instantly absorbing chaos, the mind learns to pause, to observe, to question, to separate facts from emotional interpretation. This weakens the power external events have over inner peace. Modern psychology now describes something remarkably similar. Emotional regulation depends heavily on the ability to create cognitive distance between stimulus and response. The Stoics practiced this thousands of years earlier through intentional self-awareness. Most people never realize how much unnecessary suffering comes from immediate emotional attachment. Someone ignores them and they mentally collapse. Something unexpected happens, and anxiety takes over instantly. One difficult moment emotionally contaminates the entire day. The mind reacts so quickly that there is no space left for clarity. This is why emotionally detached people often appear calmer even during pressure. Their mind does not instantly surrender control to emotional impulses. They understand something deeply important. Not every event deserves emotional possession of your mind. Not every problem deserves panic. Not every criticism deserves self-destruction. Not every inconvenience deserves internal chaos. This realization creates enormous psychological freedom. Because the moment you stop emotionally attaching yourself to every disturbance, peace becomes easier to protect. The Stoics believe that emotional strength comes from governing your inner world, instead of trying to control the external world endlessly. External conditions will always change. People will disappoint you. Situations will become uncertain. Chaos will appear unexpectedly. But when the mind learns how to remain internally grounded, external instability loses much of its power. That is why emotional detachment is not emotional weakness. It is emotional discipline. It is the ability to remain centered while life becomes unpredictable. And once a person begins separating themselves emotionally from external chaos, they start recognizing another hidden source of mental exhaustion. The modern mind is drowning in endless stimulation without even realizing it. Your mind was never designed for endless stimulation. The modern mind is overstimulated to a level human beings were never designed to handle. From the moment most people wake up, their brain is flooded with information. Notifications, messages, videos, opinions, news, noise, endless noise. The mind jumps from one stimulus to another without pause, without silence, without recovery. Even moments that used to belong to stillness are now filled with distraction. People no longer sit quietly. They scroll. They no longer reflect. They consume. They no longer observe their own thoughts. They escape from them. And slowly, the brain loses its ability to remain calm without constant stimulation. This is one of the hidden reasons so many people feel mentally exhausted today. Their attention never rests long enough to recover. The nervous system remains active almost every waking moment because the mind is constantly processing new emotional input. The brain was never meant to absorb this much information continuously. Human attention has limits. Emotional energy has limits. Mental clarity has limits. But modern life encourages nonstop stimulation, as if the mind were a machine incapable of overload. The result is psychological exhaustion, hidden beneath constant distraction. This overstimulation affects people more deeply than they realize. The mind becomes impatient, focus weakens, thoughts become fragmented, emotional reactions become faster and more impulsive. Silence starts feeling uncomfortable because the brain has become addicted to stimulation. Some people cannot even eat without watching something, cannot walk without headphones, cannot sit alone without reaching for their phone. The moment stillness appears, the mind immediately searches for distraction. because distraction has become emotional escape. The Stoics would have recognized this immediately. Seneca warned repeatedly about the danger of mental overcrowding. In Letters from a Stoic, Letter 2, he explained that a restless mind becomes scattered when it constantly moves from one thing to another without depth or reflection. He believed that endless mental consumption weakens inner stability because the mind never remains still long enough to understand itself. That lesson feels painfully relevant now. Modern minds consume more information in a single day than many ancient people consumed in months. Yet, despite this constant access to stimulation, many people feel more anxious, emotionally unstable, distracted, and mentally exhausted than ever before. Because information alone does not create peace. Constant stimulation often destroys it. The brain needs silence the same way the body needs sleep. Without moments of mental stillness, emotional recovery becomes impossible. This is why so many people feel internally restless even during moments of physical rest. Their body may stop moving, but their mind continues running endlessly. Thoughts jump rapidly from one topic to another. Emotional attention becomes fragmented. Concentration weakens. Presence disappears. And eventually, the person begins losing the ability to fully experience the moment they are living in. A conversation becomes divided attention. A peaceful morning becomes screen consumption. A quiet evening becomes endless scrolling. Life itself starts happening in the background while the mind remains trapped in continuous stimulation. Modern psychology now confirms something the Stoics understood intuitively. Excessive stimulation weakens emotional regulation and attention control. The more distracted the brain becomes, the more difficult it becomes to maintain calmness, patience, and clarity under pressure. This explains why overstimulated minds often become emotionally reactive. Small frustrations feel bigger. Patience disappears faster. Anxiety increases more easily. The brain becomes conditioned to immediate input, immediate reward, immediate emotional movement. Over time, stillness feels boring because the mind has lost tolerance for simplicity. But peace rarely exists inside constant stimulation. Peace emerges in spaces where the mind finally slows down enough to breathe. Marcus Aurelius frequently withdrew inward to regain mental clarity. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 4, Paragraph 3, he reflected on the importance of returning to the inner mind instead of becoming lost in external distraction. He believed a disciplined mind should know how to retreat into itself peacefully. Most modern minds no longer know how to do that. People are constantly connected externally while becoming increasingly disconnected internally. That internal disconnection creates a strange form of loneliness. A person can spend hours consuming content, interacting online, receiving stimulation nonstop, yet still feel mentally empty because the mind never experiences genuine stillness. And the frightening part is that overstimulation slowly reshapes emotional habits. The brain starts craving constant novelty. Attention becomes weaker. Depth disappears. Patience decreases. The person becomes psychologically dependent on distraction without realizing it. This is why many people struggle to meditate, reflect, pray, read deeply, or remain mentally present for long periods. Their mind has been conditioned to constant movement. Stillness now feels unnatural because stimulation became the default emotional state. The Stoics trained themselves to resist this internal chaos. They practiced silence intentionally, reflection intentionally, observation intentionally, not because silence was empty, but because silence revealed truth the distracted mind could never see. A calm mind notices things an overstimulated mind misses completely. Clarity, perspective, emotional patterns, inner tension, real priorities. This is why mental peace cannot grow inside endless distraction. The mind must occasionally disconnect from noise to reconnect with itself. And once a person begins reducing unnecessary stimulation, they start noticing another exhausting pattern hidden beneath their mental chaos. The constant pressure to solve every problem immediately begins consuming their emotional energy as well. The psychological trap of trying to fix everything. Many people are mentally exhausted because they feel responsible for fixing everything around them. Fixing problems, fixing relationships, fixing emotions, fixing the future, fixing other people. fixing every uncomfortable situation before it fully unfolds. The mind becomes trapped in a constant state of psychological responsibility, as if peace can only exist once every problem has been solved perfectly. But life does not work that way. Problems never fully disappear. Uncertainty never fully disappears. Imperfection never fully disappears. Yet the mind keeps chasing complete control, as if emotional safety depends on it. This creates enormous internal pressure. The person wakes up already mentally organizing solutions, thinking ahead, preparing ahead, trying to prevent mistakes before they happen, trying to manage outcomes beyond their control. Even moments that should feel peaceful become mentally occupied by unfinished concerns. The mind rarely rests because it believes rest is dangerous. Somewhere deep inside, there is a fear that if control weakens even briefly, life will fall apart. That is the hidden psychological trap. The need to fix everything creates permanent emotional tension. Some people carry responsibility for problems that do not even belong to them. They feel responsible for other people's emotions, responsible for keeping everyone happy, responsible for preventing conflict, responsible for maintaining stability in every situation. Over time, this emotional burden becomes unbearable because no human being can control every outcome. Yet the mind keeps trying. This is why mentally overwhelmed people often struggle to relax. Even during calm moments, their brain continues searching for unresolved problems. It scans constantly for what could go wrong next. It prepares emotionally for future difficulties before reality even demands it. The nervous system stays in permanent alert mode because the mind believes constant mental effort equals protection. But constant mental effort often creates the exhaustion it hopes to avoid. Epictetus repeatedly warned against this emotional mistake. In Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 1, he taught that suffering grows when human beings become attached to controlling things outside their power. The Stoics understood something many people still resist accepting today. There is a limit to what the mind can truly control. That truth can feel uncomfortable at first, because the mind desperately wants certainty. It wants guarantees. It wants reassurance. It wants complete control over outcomes. But life remains unpredictable no matter how much mental energy a person spends trying to manage it. This becomes especially dangerous for people who tie their emotional stability to problem solving. They believe they must constantly hold everything together emotionally. If something feels uncertain, they immediately rush mentally toward fixing it. If tension appears, they feel personally responsible for eliminating it. If another person struggles emotionally, they absorb that emotional weight themselves. Eventually, they become emotionally overloaded, not because they are weak, because they are carrying more psychological responsibility than the human mind was designed to hold. Modern psychology often refers to this as hyper-responsibility, the belief that you must constantly anticipate, manage, or solve every possible problem. This mindset creates chronic anxiety because the brain never receives permission to rest. The Stoics practice something radically different. They focus deeply on effort while releasing obsession over outcome. That distinction changes emotional life completely. A person can act wisely without needing total control. A person can care deeply without emotionally carrying everything. A person can prepare responsibly without mentally living inside future problems. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that human beings only control their own thoughts, actions, and responses. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 6, Paragraph 50, he reflected on the importance of remaining focused on one's own character instead of becoming consumed by external events beyond personal control. That teaching becomes powerful once understood emotionally instead of only intellectually, because many people understand logically that they cannot control everything, yet emotionally they still try to. They mentally rehearse future conversations endlessly. They over-prepare for rejection. They try to predict every possible outcome. They feel guilty when situations become difficult, even if those situations were never fully theirs to control. The mind becomes emotionally entangled with life itself. And over time, this creates silent burnout. Some people become so accustomed to carrying psychological responsibility that they no longer realize how heavy their mind has become. Their thoughts never stop searching for problems to solve. Peace feels temporary because the brain is always preparing for the next disturbance. This constant internal pressure slowly destroys emotional balance. Patience weakens. Sleep becomes difficult. Presence disappears. Small problems start feeling overwhelming because the nervous system is already overloaded. The Stoics believed true peace emerges when the mind stops demanding total control over reality, not through passivity, not through avoidance, through acceptance of human limitation. You can guide your actions, you can govern your responses, you can choose your character, but you cannot fully control life itself. The moment the mind stops trying to carry impossible levels of control, emotional weight begins to lift. Breathing becomes easier. Thoughts slow down. Presence returns. The mind finally starts separating responsibility from obsession. And once a person releases the exhausting need to fix everything, another uncomfortable truth begins revealing itself. Many people are terrified of being alone with their own mind, because silence exposes everything they have been trying to escape internally. Why solitude frightens the modern mind? Most people are not afraid of being alone. They are afraid of what their mind will reveal once distraction disappears. That is why silence feels uncomfortable for so many individuals today. The moment external stimulation fades, internal noise becomes louder. Thoughts begin surfacing that were buried beneath entertainment, conversations, scrolling, work, and constant activity. Unresolved emotions appear. Anxiety appears. Regret appears. Inner tension suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. This is why many people stay constantly distracted. Not because they truly enjoy endless stimulation, but because distraction protects them from confronting themselves. The modern world makes this incredibly easy. A person can wake up and immediately reach for their phone before even facing a single quiet thought. Every empty moment can instantly be filled with content, noise, music, videos, opinions, messages, and stimulation. The mind rarely experiences uninterrupted stillness anymore. But beneath all that distraction, emotional unrest quietly remains alive. The frightening truth is that many people have spent years avoiding genuine solitude because solitude exposes emotional reality. It reveals how exhausted the mind truly is. It reveals emotional dependence. It reveals unresolved fears. It reveals how little peace exists internally once external noise disappears. That is why some people panic in silence. The moment they sit alone, the mind starts racing. Old memories return. Imaginary problems appear. Anxiety intensifies. The nervous system suddenly feels restless without external stimulation. Instead of feeling peaceful, solitude feels emotionally threatening. The Stoics viewed this very differently. They believed solitude was not punishment, it was training. Seneca often reflected on the importance of being comfortable in one's own company. In Letters from a Stoic, letter 10, he explained that a person should learn how to live peacefully with themselves instead of constantly depending on external distraction for emotional escape. That lesson feels almost revolutionary today. Many people spend more time connected to strangers online than connected to their own thoughts internally. Their attention constantly moves outward while self-awareness becomes weaker. Eventually, they become emotionally unfamiliar with themselves. This creates a strange form of internal emptiness. A person can be surrounded by stimulation all day and still feel disconnected inside because distraction cannot replace inner peace. External noise may temporarily cover emotional discomfort, but it never resolves it. The mind simply postpones confrontation with itself, and postponed emotions rarely disappear. They wait silently beneath distraction. This is why unresolved emotional tension often appears most strongly during quiet moments, late at night, early in the morning, during silence, during solitude. Without external stimulation to numb awareness, the mind finally reveals what has been emotionally neglected. Modern psychology recognizes something remarkably similar. Human beings often use distraction as emotional avoidance. Instead of processing fear, loneliness, insecurity, grief, or uncertainty directly, the mind escapes into stimulation. But avoided emotions do not lose power. They often grow stronger internally over time. The Stoics understood this centuries earlier. They trained themselves to sit with discomfort instead of running from it, to observe thoughts instead of drowning them in distraction, to face emotional reality directly instead of escaping endlessly. Because a person who cannot remain peacefully alone often becomes emotionally dependent on constant external noise. That dependency quietly destroys mental clarity. The mind loses depth, reflection weakens, self-awareness weakens, inner stability weakens. The person becomes psychologically restless because they no longer know how to exist calmly without stimulation. Marcus Aurelius frequently retreated inward to restore clarity. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 4, Paragraph 3, he reminded himself that the mind can find renewal within itself when it learns how to step away from external disturbance. He understood that solitude reveals truths, distraction hides. That is why solitude often feels uncomfortable before it becomes peaceful. At first, silence exposes emotional clutter. The thoughts you avoided, the fears you suppressed, the exhaustion you ignored, the unresolved tension hidden beneath constant activity. Many people mistake this discomfort as proof that solitude is unhealthy. In reality, it is often proof that the mind has been overstimulated and emotionally neglected for too long. The nervous system needs silence to recover. The mind needs stillness to reorganize itself. Without moments of quiet reflection, emotional chaos continues operating unchecked beneath the surface. This is why people who never spend time alone with themselves often remain internally confused. Their thoughts become shaped entirely by external input. Their emotions become reactive instead of reflective. Their identity becomes dependent on constant interaction, approval, or distraction. But solitude creates something powerful when approached correctly: clarity, observation, self-awareness, emotional honesty, the ability to hear your own mind without external interference. That is why the Stoics valued solitude so deeply, not because they rejected human connection, but because they understood that a person who cannot remain peacefully alone will struggle to remain peaceful anywhere else. And once silence begins exposing the truth inside the mind, another exhausting emotional pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Many people are mentally collapsing because they spend their entire lives pretending to be stronger than they actually feel. The hidden exhaustion of pretending to be strong all the time. Some people are not emotionally exhausted because life is hard. They are exhausted because they never allow themselves to stop performing strength. They carry pressure silently, pain silently, fear silently, stress silently. They convince themselves they must always appear composed, controlled, capable, unshaken. Over time, this constant emotional performance becomes incredibly heavy because the mind was never designed to suppress everything continuously. The modern world quietly rewards this behavior. People admire those who never break down publicly, those who always seem strong, always productive, always emotionally stable, always able to handle more. But beneath that image, many individuals are mentally collapsing in silence, because pretending to be okay requires enormous emotional energy. The body can survive temporary stress. The mind struggles to survive permanent emotional suppression. This is why many emotionally overwhelmed people feel disconnected from themselves. They spend so much time maintaining control externally that they stop acknowledging what they actually feel internally. Sadness becomes weakness. Vulnerability becomes danger. Emotional honesty becomes something to hide. The mind learns to survive through emotional concealment. But hidden emotions do not disappear simply because they are ignored. They remain inside the nervous system, inside thought patterns, inside emotional reactions, inside physical tension. Eventually, suppressed emotions begin leaking into daily life in subtle ways. Irritability increases, patience decreases, sleep weakens, anxiety grows stronger, the mind becomes restless without understanding why. This is one of the hidden costs of constantly pretending to be strong. The emotional pressure never fully leaves the body. Seneca warned against becoming emotionally imprisoned by appearance. In Letters from a Stoic, letter 78, He reflected on how human beings often suffer more intensely when they refuse to honestly confront their inner state. The Stoics did not believe strength meant emotional denial. They believed strength meant emotional discipline combined with self-awareness. That distinction changes everything, because many people misunderstand emotional control completely. Suppressing emotion is not the same as mastering emotion. Pretending not to feel pain does not remove pain. Ignoring emotional exhaustion does not create resilience. The mind simply carries the burden silently until it eventually becomes too heavy. Modern psychology now confirms what the Stoics understood intuitively. Emotional suppression increases psychological stress because the nervous system continues processing emotions even when conscious awareness tries to deny them. The body remembers what the mind refuses to acknowledge. That is why emotionally suppressed people often feel exhausted without clear explanation. Their nervous system never fully relaxes. Part of them remains emotionally guarded at all times. They monitor themselves constantly, trying not to appear weak, trying not to lose control, trying not to burden others, trying not to reveal vulnerability. This creates continuous internal tension. Some people become so accustomed to emotional suppression that they no longer know what authentic emotional expression feels like. They smile automatically, say they are fine automatically, continue functioning automatically. Meanwhile, internally, the pressure keeps building quietly. The frightening part is that this emotional disconnection slowly damages self-awareness itself. A person who constantly hides their emotions eventually struggles to understand them clearly. Instead of processing feelings directly, they distract themselves, numb themselves, overwork themselves, overstimulate themselves, or mentally detach from their own emotional reality. But the mind always seeks release eventually, sometimes through anxiety, sometimes through emotional burnout, sometimes through uncontrollable overthinking, sometimes through sudden emotional collapse after years of silent pressure. The Stoics approached emotional strength differently. Marcus Aurelius did not train himself to become emotionally numb. He trained himself to remain emotionally grounded. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, paragraph 48, he reflected on the importance of maintaining inner stability without becoming emotionally consumed by suffering. That is real strength. Not pretending nothing affects you, not performing perfection constantly, not carrying impossible emotional weight silently forever. Real strength is the ability to face emotional reality honestly, without allowing it to destroy your judgment. That requires courage, because emotional honesty feels vulnerable. Admitting exhaustion feels uncomfortable. Acknowledging pain feels risky. Many people fear that if they stop pretending to be strong, everything inside them will collapse completely. But often the opposite happens. The moment emotional honesty begins, inner tension starts loosening. The nervous system starts softening. The mind stops fighting itself constantly. Peace becomes more possible because the person is no longer carrying the exhausting burden of maintaining a false emotional image every moment of their life. The Stoics believed emotional discipline should create clarity, not emotional imprisonment. A person can remain resilient while still being emotionally aware, calm while still human, strong while still honest. Because true emotional stability is not built through denial. It is built through self-awareness, acceptance, and internal balance. And once a person stops exhausting themselves by pretending to be invulnerable, they begin noticing another powerful truth. Many emotional storms become far less destructive when the mind learns how to slow down its automatic reactions. The Stoic habit of slowing down internal reactions. Most emotional suffering happens so quickly that people barely notice the process happening inside their own mind. Something small happens. A message gets ignored. Someone speaks with a cold tone. A mistake appears. An unexpected problem interrupts the day, and within seconds, the mind reacts automatically. Emotion rises instantly. Thoughts accelerate instantly. Assumptions appear instantly. The nervous system enters tension before reality has even been fully understood. This is how small moments become emotional storms. The external event itself is often brief, but the internal reaction expands it into something much larger. One uncomfortable situation triggers anger, fear, insecurity, frustration, anxiety, or shame almost immediately because the mind reacts before it reflects. That automatic emotional speed quietly destroys peace. Most people never pause long enough to observe what is happening internally. Their reactions become impulsive and unconscious. The mind instantly attaches meaning to situations before clarity has a chance to emerge. Someone delays responding and the mind creates rejection. Something goes wrong and the mind creates catastrophe. A criticism appears and the mind creates personal attack. Everything happens so fast internally that the person begins living emotionally inside assumptions instead of reality. The Stoics trained themselves to interrupt this exact process. They understood that emotional reaction is often the moment where unnecessary suffering begins. That is why they practiced slowing down the mind before responding impulsively to external events. Epictetus emphasized this constantly. In Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, Chapter 18, he explained that impressions arrive automatically, but human beings still possess the ability to examine those impressions before surrendering emotionally to them. That teaching becomes extremely powerful once applied in daily life, because the first emotional interpretation is not always truth. The mind reacts quickly for survival, not accuracy. It predicts danger before evidence appears. It exaggerates uncertainty before understanding the full situation. It protects the ego before examining reality calmly. This is why emotionally reactive minds suffer so intensely. Every inconvenience becomes amplified internally. Every unexpected situation feels threatening. Every difficult moment emotionally expands beyond its actual size. The nervous system remains constantly overstimulated because the mind never pauses long enough to regulate itself. Modern psychology now describes this as emotional impulsivity and cognitive reactivity. The faster the brain reacts emotionally, the more likely it becomes to distort situations through fear, insecurity, or anger. The Stoics understood this long before modern neuroscience existed. They believed wisdom begins with observation before reaction. That single habit changes emotional life completely. A calm pause weakens impulsive emotion. A calm pause creates perspective. A calm pause separates reality from imagination. But modern minds struggle with this deeply because overstimulation trained people to react instantly to everything. Immediate opinions, immediate anger, immediate judgment, immediate emotional expression. The mind rarely slows down long enough to process experience clearly. That creates psychological chaos. A person who reacts instantly often creates suffering unnecessarily. Relationships become damaged by impulsive emotion. Stress becomes magnified by catastrophic thinking. Peace disappears because the nervous system never receives time to stabilize. Some people spend entire days emotionally controlled by reactions that happened within seconds. One small frustration ruins the mood for hours. One uncomfortable interaction dominates mental space all night. One moment of criticism destroys confidence temporarily. The reaction becomes larger than the event itself. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself to maintain inner calm before emotionally surrendering to external disturbance. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, Paragraph 28, he reflected on the importance of remaining internally steady regardless of external circumstances. That steadiness was not natural. It was trained. The Stoics practiced slowing the mind intentionally, observing thoughts intentionally, examining emotional impulses intentionally, because they understood something many people never realize. The first emotional reaction is often the least reliable part of the mind. Fear reacts quickly. Anger reacts quickly. Insecurity reacts quickly. Wisdom usually arrives slower. This is why emotional discipline requires patience with your own mind. Not suppression, not denial. Observation. The ability to notice emotional movement without immediately becoming consumed by it. That creates enormous psychological freedom. When the mind slows down, many imagined problems lose power. Many emotional assumptions collapse. Many fears become less convincing. Clarity finally has space to emerge. The nervous system starts calming instead of escalating automatically. This changes relationships. decision-making, stress management, inner peace itself. Because a person who learns to slow down internal reactions stops feeding emotional chaos constantly. They begin responding instead of impulsively reacting, and that distinction quietly transforms emotional life. But once the mind slows down enough to observe itself clearly, another difficult truth begins appearing. Much of human anxiety comes from trying to control a future that has never promised certainty in the first place. Why your mind becomes more peaceful when you accept uncertainty. One of the deepest sources of human anxiety is the desperate need to know what will happen next. The mind constantly searches for certainty because certainty feels safe. It wants guarantees about relationships, the future, success, health, stability, and outcomes. It wants reassurance that pain will not arrive unexpectedly. It wants proof that life will unfold according to plan. But life never makes that promise. And this is where the internal struggle begins. The mind keeps demanding certainty from a world built on unpredictability. That conflict quietly creates enormous psychological tension. People overthink because they want certainty. They replay situations because they want certainty. They seek constant reassurance because they want certainty. They mentally prepare for every possible disaster because uncertainty feels emotionally threatening. The brain believes that if it can predict enough outcomes, it can avoid suffering. But no amount of mental preparation can fully control life. The future remains uncertain no matter how much energy the mind spends trying to secure it. This becomes exhausting. Some people live almost entirely inside anticipation, waiting for problems, waiting for rejection, waiting for bad news, waiting for something to go wrong. Even peaceful moments become contaminated by the fear that peace might disappear. The nervous system never fully relaxes because the mind keeps scanning the future, searching for danger. That is why uncertainty feels so emotionally uncomfortable. Uncertainty forces the mind to confront its lack of control. And for many people, that feels terrifying. The Stoics approached uncertainty differently. Instead of demanding guarantees from life, they trained themselves to become emotionally capable of handling uncertainty itself. They understood that peace does not come from controlling the future. Peace comes from becoming internally stable enough to face whatever the future brings. Epictetus taught this repeatedly. In Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 6, he explained that suffering increases when human beings emotionally attach themselves to outcomes outside their control. The Stoics believed emotional freedom begins when the mind stops demanding certainty from life itself. That idea feels uncomfortable at first because the modern mind has been trained to chase control constantly. People want guaranteed success, guaranteed love, guaranteed security, guaranteed stability. But the more emotionally dependent a person becomes on certainty, the more fragile their peace becomes. Because uncertainty is unavoidable. Relationships change, circumstances change, plans fail, unexpected situations appear. The future constantly remains partially unknown. A mind that cannot tolerate uncertainty becomes trapped in permanent anxiety, because reality itself will never become fully predictable. Modern psychology recognizes this clearly. Many forms of chronic anxiety are deeply connected to intolerance of uncertainty. The brain interprets uncertainty as danger, even when no immediate threat exists. That is why anxious minds often obsess over future scenarios endlessly. They are not truly searching for solutions. They are searching for emotional certainty. But certainty rarely arrives permanently. The Stoics understood something far more powerful. Instead of controlling uncertainty, strengthen yourself emotionally. That changes the entire relationship with fear. Because once the mind accepts uncertainty as part of life, it stops fighting reality constantly. The nervous system begins calming. Thoughts slow down. The obsession with prediction weakens. Inner peace becomes more possible because the mind no longer demands impossible guarantees before allowing itself to rest. Marcus Aurelius reflected often on the unpredictability of existence. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 7, Paragraph 54, he reminded himself that external events unfold according to forces larger than personal control. His focus was never on controlling every outcome, His focus was on governing his own character regardless of outcome. That is where emotional stability begins, not in certainty, in resilience. A resilient mind does not need constant reassurance to remain calm. It understands that discomfort may come, loss may come, unexpected change may come. But it also understands something equally important. The mind is stronger than it believes. This realization changes anxiety profoundly. Because much of overthinking is actually the mind trying to emotionally escape uncertainty. It believes endless thinking will create protection. But endless thinking often creates greater fear instead. The Stoics practiced acceptance differently, not passive surrender, not hopelessness, clear acceptance of reality. Life contains unpredictability. People contain unpredictability. The future contains unpredictability. Fighting this truth emotionally only creates more suffering. Acceptance removes enormous psychological weight because the mind finally stops demanding absolute control over existence itself. That does not mean becoming careless. It means becoming grounded. A grounded person prepares wisely while accepting uncertainty calmly. They act responsibly without becoming emotionally consumed by what they cannot fully control. That balance creates inner peace. Because the mind finally understands something life has been trying to teach all along. You do not need certainty to survive. You need emotional stability within uncertainty. And once a person stops fighting uncertainty constantly, they begin uncovering one final internal battle that has silently drained their peace for years. The exhausting war between who they truly are and who they believe they must become for the world around them. The moment you stop fighting yourself internally. One of the most exhausting battles a person can experience is the battle against themselves. Not against other people, not against life, against their own mind. Many individuals spend years living divided internally. One part of them feels exhausted, while another part demands more. One part wants peace, while another part constantly seeks approval, perfection, achievement, or control. They criticize themselves endlessly for not being stronger, smarter, more disciplined, more successful, more emotionally stable. The mind becomes both the victim and the attacker at the same time. This internal conflict slowly destroys peace because the person never truly feels allowed to exist as they are. There is always another standard to reach, another image to maintain, another version of themselves they feel pressured to become before they finally deserve rest, confidence, or self-acceptance. That pressure becomes psychologically crushing over time. Some people wake up already disappointed in themselves, not because they failed catastrophically, but because their mind constantly compares reality against impossible internal expectations. Every mistake becomes evidence of inadequacy. Every weakness becomes shame. Every emotional struggle becomes proof they are failing internally. This creates silent emotional warfare. The person begins fighting their own humanity, fighting imperfection, fighting emotion, fighting fear, fighting vulnerability. The mind constantly says the same thing in different forms. You should be better by now. That sentence quietly poisons peace, because no matter what the person accomplishes, the mind keeps moving the standard further away. Success becomes temporary relief instead of lasting fulfillment. Rest feels undeserved. Self-worth becomes conditional. The Stoics understood the danger of internal self-conflict deeply. Marcus Aurelius often reflected on the importance of living in alignment with one's own nature, instead of becoming mentally fragmented by endless self-judgment. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 5, Paragraph 1, he reminded himself each morning not to resent the responsibilities of being human, but to accept them with clarity and dignity. That lesson matters profoundly, because many people secretly resent themselves for being human, for feeling anxiety, for feeling fear, for feeling sadness, for struggling emotionally. They believe strength means never experiencing inner difficulty. So when emotional pain appears, the mind turns against itself instead of responding with understanding and discipline. This internal hostility creates enormous suffering. Modern psychology often describes this as self-conflict or internalized perfectionism. The mind develops unrealistic emotional expectations and then punishes itself endlessly for failing to meet them. Over time, the nervous system becomes trapped between pressure and self-criticism. That is why some people never feel at peace no matter how much they achieve. The conflict exists internally, and no external success can fully silence a mind that remains at war with itself. The Stoics practiced something radically different. They pursued growth without self-hatred, discipline without emotional cruelty, self-awareness without self-destruction. Epictetus taught that human beings should focus on progress rather than obsessing over perfection. In Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 4, he emphasized the importance of training the mind patiently instead of emotionally collapsing every time imperfection appeared. That mindset changes emotional life completely, because growth becomes sustainable when the mind stops attacking itself constantly. A person becomes calmer, more honest internally, less emotionally defensive. They stop exhausting themselves trying to appear invulnerable. They stop demanding perfection before allowing themselves peace. The internal pressure finally begins softening. This does not mean abandoning responsibility or discipline. It means ending unnecessary psychological violence against yourself. Many people speak to themselves with a level of cruelty they would never direct toward another human being. Their inner dialogue becomes relentless criticism. Every flaw becomes magnified. Every setback becomes identity. Every emotional struggle becomes personal failure. That kind of mental environment cannot create peace. The nervous system remains tense because the mind itself feels unsafe. The Stoics believed the disciplined mind should become an ally, not an enemy. A guide, a stabilizing force, a source of clarity during difficulty, not a constant source of punishment. The moment a person stops fighting themselves internally, something powerful begins happening. Mental energy returns, clarity returns, emotional balance returns. The mind no longer wastes enormous energy resisting its own humanity. Instead of suppressing emotion blindly, the person learns how to observe emotion wisely. Instead of hating imperfection, they learn how to grow through awareness. Instead of constantly chasing an idealized future version of themselves, they finally begin existing more fully in the present. This creates deep internal stability, because peace becomes impossible when the mind constantly treats itself like an enemy that must be defeated. And once this internal war finally begins ending, one final realization emerges with undeniable clarity. Inner peace was never waiting for the world to become quiet first. It was waiting for the mind to stop feeding its own chaos every single day. Inner peace begins the day you stop feeding mental chaos. Most people spend their entire lives waiting for peace to arrive from the outside. They believe peace will come when problems disappear, when stress disappears, when uncertainty disappears, when life finally becomes stable, predictable, and emotionally safe. But that day never fully arrives. Life continues changing. Difficulties continue appearing. Unexpected moments continue happening. The external world never remains calm forever. And this is the truth many people eventually discover too late. Inner peace was never meant to depend on external perfection. It begins the moment the mind stops feeding unnecessary chaos internally. That changes everything. Because most mental suffering is not created by a single catastrophic event. It is created gradually through repeated emotional habits. Overthinking repeatedly, imagining disasters repeatedly, replaying pain repeatedly, seeking validation repeatedly, reacting impulsively repeatedly, escaping silence repeatedly, fighting uncertainty repeatedly, fighting yourself repeatedly. Each habit quietly feeds mental noise until the mind becomes emotionally exhausted without understanding why. The frightening part is that many people continue strengthening these patterns every single day while still wondering why peace feels so distant. The Stoics understood something profoundly important. The mind becomes what it repeatedly practices. Marcus Aurelius reflected constantly on the importance of governing inner thought because he knew the quality of the mind shapes the quality of life itself. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 5, paragraph 16, he reminded himself that the soul becomes colored by the nature of its thoughts. That truth remains painfully relevant today. A mind trained in fear will continuously create fear. A mind trained in emotional chaos will continuously create emotional chaos. A mind addicted to tension will struggle to recognize peace even when peace is available. This is why inner peace cannot simply be found externally. It must be practiced internally, not once, repeatedly, every day. The modern mind has become incredibly skilled at feeding disturbance. People feed anxiety through endless anticipation, feed insecurity through comparison, feed exhaustion through overstimulation, feed emotional instability through constant reaction. Then they wonder why calmness feels impossible. But peace grows through opposite habits: slowing down thoughts, observing emotions calmly, accepting uncertainty, releasing unnecessary control, creating silence, returning attention to the present moment. The Stoics believed peace was not weakness, it was mastery over unnecessary internal suffering. That distinction matters deeply, because many people believe a peaceful mind means a problem-free life. The Stoics knew otherwise. A peaceful mind is not a mind that never experiences difficulty. It is a mind that no longer multiplies difficulty unnecessarily through uncontrolled thought. That is where emotional freedom begins, not when life becomes easier, when the mind becomes clearer. Epictetus taught that human beings are disturbed less by events themselves and more by the judgments they continuously attach to those events. Once a person understands this emotionally, not just intellectually, something inside them begins changing. They stop treating every thought like truth. They stop surrendering emotionally to every fear. They stop allowing temporary emotions to dominate permanent identity. The mind slowly becomes quieter, not because reality changed instantly, because the relationship with thought changed. This is what most people never realize. The mind constantly consumes whatever you repeatedly feed it. Feed it fear, and fear grows stronger. Feed it anger, and tension grows stronger. Feed it comparison, and insecurity grows stronger. Feed it stillness, awareness, discipline, and perspective, and something different begins happening internally. The nervous system softens. Thoughts slow down. Presence returns. Life stops feeling like constant psychological survival. That transformation does not happen through motivation alone. It happens through awareness. The moment you begin noticing how much suffering is being created internally, you also begin realizing how much of that suffering no longer needs to continue. That realization creates freedom, not perfect peace, not permanent calmness. Human beings will still experience fear, stress, sadness, uncertainty, and emotional pain sometimes. The Stoics never denied this reality. What they rejected was unnecessary suffering created by an undisciplined mind, constantly fighting itself. That is the difference. A peaceful person is not someone who never struggles. It is someone who no longer turns every struggle into internal chaos. And perhaps the most important realization of all is this: your mind does not need to control everything to finally rest. It does not need complete certainty, complete approval, complete perfection, complete control over life itself. It only needs to stop carrying battles that were never necessary in the first place. The moment the mind stops feeding chaos constantly, peace no longer feels distant. It begins quietly returning from within.